Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland. In the last part, we went through the entirety of Butter Building, finding Mr. Shine and Mr. Bright at the end of it all, and now we're in World 4 of Grape Garden, which I love this song. A weird little thing though that the game does, and you can hear the way I recorded the game because of it, is that when you start a world, the first level's theme plays and persists until you exit the first level. However, you can tell that I don't play the entire game in one fell swoop like that, because between the the start of the level select and the end of the level world begin cutscene, you can hear the music turn into the actual world level map music for a brief second. That's mostly because, as with usual for my LPs at this point, really, this was recorded world for world. Usually I would do level for level, but this game's so short to begin with, there's no real harm in me doing world for world. And there's the switch for this level. I do believe the location of this one's actually a reference to something in a different Kirby game. Namely, I think it's similar to a way you access either a secret in some other games or a HAL room. And for those who don't know what a HAL room is, because I didn't know what these were for the longest time, because some of them are really well hidden. In a lot of Kirby games, HAL likes to hide their logo arranged in star blocks in really well-hidden rooms. It was in the NES version of Kirby's Adventure, for instance, but I think you can only access it through what's technically a glitch in the NES's programming. The room for that is in the remake, but you cannot access it without some codes. Which, speaking of codes in that, compared to some other games I played, I think Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland has very little in terms of content comparatively. I think the most there is, aside from that inaccessible HAL room, might be some debug rooms. Because, if I recall at least, the original Kirby's Adventure had a pretty in-depth, like, cutting room floor page in particular, because that's where I learned a lot of my little behind-the-scenes trivia. For instance, I think the original game had some cutout sprites that you just could not access, the Crane game had some things changed about it, and so on and so forth, but in this, it's pretty straightforward. And I know some people might say, well, it's a remake. They're not going to have too much behind the scenes that could change. But I don't think that's entirely true, because depending on the depth of the remake, for instance, Mega Man Powered Up versus Mega Man Powered Up and Resident Evil Remake versus, say, this or Maverick Hunter X, there's probably still going to be some good changes behind the scenes that they potentially want to implement. Grape Garden on the whole, it has, well, first off, I love the way this stage aesthetic looks. We only ever see this, I think, in this one level. Is supposedly the cloud level for the game, because it's a platformer, so it needs a cloud level. And while I think it might have some of the highest amount of bottomless pits, nothing ever really gets added to that beyond that. And also, something I haven't really talked about yet is that this game's backgrounds are gorgeous. And they almost look like they should be out of like a PlayStation RPG and just really crunched down, even compared to a PlayStation game. Like, I'm looking at this background in particular, doesn't it just look like you would see it in like a 3D version of Final Fantasy VI's Opera House? It's awesome. Kirby games don't really ever hammer it in when it comes to graphics. They usually just try to make everything fit within the art style, and I love it when they do that, but I also love when they decide to be like, you know, let's get really detailed here. Also, while I see them rolling like this on screen, something I forgot to mention earlier about the Poppy Bro Juniors, when they're rolling on something like that, it's one of two things. Either an apple, which you can swallow just as a projectile to be used, or a Maxamato, which if you kill the Poppy Bro Jr. without damaging the Maxamato, you will be able to use as an item and therefore restore your health. And, wow, that's a lot of Poppy Bro Seniors. Spark is an ability I really didn't give enough credit when I was younger, because, yeah, it's very limited range, but it has some pretty high hit rate. Also, I'll say Crash. I think one of the hardest things for me to get used to in later Kirby games is when bosses that usually give a certain ability don't. Because the Poppy Bro Jr., Senior in particular, will always either give Bomb or Crash. And I would always prefer it to give me Bomb, which is actually for some reason what I was expecting to get there. But not so much the case. Now, something that kind of makes the drawing minigame the worst, but also the best, just because I love the graphical style for it as well, is that this is the only minigame that I don't think you can ever win 2 extra lives on. Because in the grind race and the bomb rally, if you just get second, you'll get 2 lives. However, in this, you'll get, for getting second, by that I mean failing at Meta Knight, you get 1 life. But for beating Meta Knight, you get 3. I think. It's actually been a while since I beat him. Which means it's kind of a lower return minigame on the whole. Because I know if you lose to DDD, you only get points. Which makes this kind of the one that's the least worth going after on it. I do them on instinct, but I honestly forget if doing the minigames counts for completion. And now we have another ability of fire to use. Fire and other fire type abilities can also set up fuses like this, which will get to a cannon and then explode, sending you to wherever they're set to send you. Most of the time it's to a switch, an extra life, or an ability that you might need for something coming up. Other abilities that can set those off, I want to say you might just be burning, actually. But still, that's important to know. And an interesting little thing that I'm surprised they never brought back for this game is that when you jump into a cannon in the, or more accurately, with the little power window there on the bottom left, in the NES version, there was originally, for some reason, planned a cannon panel for that. And it's actually used in, like, the French version or something, but in the remake, they decided to do away with that in general because we need that room. Also, I don't know why the Shotzos are different colored. Mind you, a weird thing that the Kirby series does, for the most part, is that the later you get into a game, they just start to recolor the enemies for actually no reason. I mean, it's nice and colorful, but why? I mean, I do admittedly love the green Bronto guys. I forget their actual full names. But why? Either way, in between parts, I did manage to get up that little list of what it says for the pause screens for various powers. So let's go over that list. If you have backdrop, the pause screen says, "Woo-ha! Once I grab a foe, throw him with a control pad." Cool. Beam says, "This beams like a whip, wah-pish, beam it." And before I continue on, we got 2 new powers here. Sleep puts you to sleep. Some games this would actually restore your health, but here it's just to look cute. Ball is an interesting one. When you go to your ball form, you actually aren't counted as an attack until you get some momentum going, in which case, you'll start getting followed by a little trail, not too unlike a speed booster from Metroid. And if you're really good with this fight, as you'll see here, this power, you can do some real damage really quickly to boss fights. But comparatively, it's one of the rarer powers in the game, and especially if you're the more defensive play type, might be potentially the most useless. Moving on, the burning pause screen says, "Flaming tackle time, who's gonna stop me?" Crash says, "Warning, use only as a last resort." Cutter says, "The cutter boomerang is coming right back at you." I think that's actually a nice little shaded, rhyme-shaded reference to the anime. Fire says, "Fire, hot, so hot, too hot to touch." Freeze says, "Stop, come no closer, I'll chill you to the bone." Hammer says, "Pound them to the ground, pound pegs and break open new areas." High jump says, "Big jump equals big tackle." The next one's actually, I don't think a power-up we've seen yet, so I'm going to keep that in my mouth for now. Laser says, "Light amplification of stimulated emission of radiation, and it ricochets off hills too." Light says, "Brighten these dark corners can only be used once." Mike says, "Wah, oh yeah, uh-huh, baby, rock on. Can only be used 3 times." Needle says, "Hands off, here, pointy spikes, they're pokey spikes." When you have nothing, it says, "Swallow your enemies, induct to copy their moves. Experiment by swallowing different kinds of enemies." And now we have a new mini-boss type. I think this thing's name is just Elephant, but I think it's spelled in a corrupted fashion. This thing you don't want to touch, because if you do, it'll throw you directly into the nearest wall. Otherwise, it likes to roll across the screen, in which case if it touches you, it will still throw you. And it can also throw an apple at you, which is what you want to use to attack it if you have no power. And for beating it, we get the throw ability, which inhales enemies and allows you to chuck them in any direction when you're holding the D-pad. It's not a bad power, but it's also one of the rarest in the game. I think Elephant is the only thing in the game you can get this from. And I think the Elephant mini-boss itself only shows up in like 2 or 3 levels, period. I don't even think you can, yeah, because I think like Suplex, you can't get this through the museums, because only enemies that give you powers that show up as not many bosses show up in museums. Either way, continuing on with the, what's it called? Pause screen names. Parasol says, the sun shines on this parasol of mine where I walk, enemies balk, and I float gently down. Sleep says, do not disturb, I need my beauty rests. Spark says, bzz, 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 bzz. The next one is also one we have yet to see. Stone says, no one can hurt me, look up below. Sword says, I can't lose with the sword. If they zig, I cut them. If they zag, I cut them too. Throw says, try throwing some enemy straight. Press up or down to change direction. Tornado says, spin, spin. Spin, spin, spin. Spin, 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 spin. Spin, spin, spin. Ah! The UFO says, wow, I'm so lucky to copy the UFO. I can do 4 kinds of moves. It all depends on how long you hold the B button. And Wheel says, I ride like the wind. Fast. Too fast. Nice little character there, but at the same time, I honestly kind of would have liked if they did what some later games did, at least in this remake, where aside from just having the cute little description, they also had like the button commands or a better description of what it could do. I mean, but at the same time though, I do admit, given how simple the powers are in this game, with more or less only like 2 or 3 of them having extra inputs that you can do, that would feel kind of just strange, because given this is the remake of the NES game, they did decide to keep the simplicity of the powers. It's fairly obvious what happens when you just press the B button, you know what I mean? I want to say that was the last level of World 4. No, it wasn't. Actually, I entirely forget what's in Grape Garden 6. Okay, this one. This level, for some reason, always sticks out in my mind, mostly because it's one of the few levels in the game with level design like this that outright curves up and down and around itself for some reason. For the most part, Kirby game levels tend to be more of the Mega Man style straightforward ones compared to, say, Mario levels where you can go up and down and sideways, or Sonic games where you can do that same thing. From what I've seen in the very little I played, it looks like they only started to change that around a bit more towards the Return to Dreamland Kirby era, because prior to that, it was very straightforward, with obviously the lone real big exception being Amazing Mirror, given how that game is laid out. And I will get to that game eventually, because I do love Amazing Mirror. Now, I know something's here, but you need to actually do some investigating to find this otherwise, because there's a switch right here. How did I know that door was there? Well, as you can see, it's a dark room, and the very few dark rooms in the game have the light power in them somewhere. So you're supposed to just light the room and walk backwards knowingly. Kinda strange, and in some ways kind of stupid, but I'm not gonna harp on it too much, because that's part of that's just because this used to be an NES game. You know what I mean? Because modern Kirby games do have some trickery when it comes to their secrets, but not to that kind of level. Usually. Though Kirby games also love to do dumb puzzles like this. Don't do what I'm about to do. That was dumb of me. I have gotten that wrong, I think, every single time I've done that in my lifetime, which is quite a few. Mostly just because I don't think forward like that enough. At least in Kirby games. It is kind of an effect of the game I'm playing influences how I think, sort of. Because when I'm playing a Kirby game, I'm not expecting anything complicated, so I just kind of rush through it, unless it's a puzzle I have to outright observe. Either way, now it's time for the World 4 boss. It's good old Krakko again, and the fight starts off with us actually having to high jump through a lot of level. I forget if what's below us is technically instant kill or not. I'm gonna err on the side of caution and say it is, so don't fall down. I think Krakko can do his lightning attacks on certain platforms. I think he might also be able to destroy certain others. But once we get to the top is when the fight truly begins, and he's basically the same he's always been. He'll fly back and forth across the screen, doing either a swooping motion to try and hit you, lightning attacks to try and hit you, and he'll occasionally spit out an enemy which can give you high jump. So basically it's the exact same attack pattern he's had since Dreamland 1. As you can see, high jump kinda makes him a non-issue. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 4 we'll be heading into World 5. See you guys then.